Hello, this is Lucia Dello. This is SEO in 2024 Additional Insights.
Lucia, what is your additional insight for SEO in 2024?
My insight is to align your KPIs with your clients so you can measure success the same way. If you want to build a successful campaign, you often think from your SEO point of view it's gone really, really well, but actually you might receive an underwhelming response from your client. In that case, that's when this has happened, and there's been a break in the failure cycle. So as an SEO, you're measuring all your things, like you're measuring hits on the website, you're measuring the organic traffic, you're measuring engagement, and eventually the sales. But from a client's point of view, as well as measuring acquisition, which is very important, they're also looking at what's happened on their products, which products have sold, which ones have been returned. They're interested in stock optimization, order values. They're looking at clients that repeat buy again, and also understanding their margins and their profit. So if, for example, if there's a Black Friday campaign that's run on, from an SEO point of view, it's been very successful. But by the time you get to January, the client's seeing there's been a lot of refunds happening, and actually, they haven't achieved what they wanted to. They're going to end up with lower than they expected profit, and they're going to end up with their cash flow not being as good as they wanted to. So when you're not looking the same way as the client, this occurs. And the way really to overcome it is work very close with the client, look at their specific goals, try and understand them, and make sure that whether they want to actually get rid of some stock that's not performing very well, or whether it's the fact, their margins that they need to achieve aren't being done. When you do that, you can know it and be more successful and more effective when you run your campaigns.
So to begin with, you started talking about aligning your KPIs with your clients. How often do you need to do that? I mean, is that just when you're onboarding your client and understanding your client, getting to understand their businesses, or do you need to do that on an ongoing basis?
I think really on an ongoing basis. I think your client will have primary goals they tell you for the campaign of what they want to achieve, but they'll also have secondary goals within their business. And these secondary goals will be other things they want to achieve. And over time, that will change as their business develops and they've got specific things in mind and as the environment moves. So the more and more you can work with them and constantly refine it to look at what they're doing and try and help them achieve it, the better you can go.
And I guess their KPIs will change over time as well, depending on their particular business needs.
Absolutely. And so if they introduce a new item of stock or a new product line that suddenly starts, performing well, they might want to put more focus on that, less onto other sides of it. Or it might be, that they're running a sale and their margins start dropping. So, there's a constantly moving picture. And, we can't assume that it's going to stand still. So the more we can understand what they're looking at, the more we can help them.
You also talk about breaking the built-in failure cycle. So what is the built-in failure cycle, and how do you do that?
To me, the built-in failure cycle is the fact that you've got a campaign going on. And when you run a campaign as a marketing or SEO agency, you look at all the marketing data. Then the retailers look at what's happening on their e-commerce platform in terms of their product sales, customer retention. They're looking at, margins that's being achieved. And then the accountants also producing some profit and loss reports. So 3 sets of reports are happening, and they're also happening at different time periods. The campaign stats for the time period of the campaign, the ongoing activity through the sales in the e-commerce platform, and then this different measure that the accountant's working on. So you're trying to look at 3 different types of data and 3 different reporting periods. And that's where the failure sets in, that you're looking at different things. And if you're looking only at the acquisition part, you're not seeing the rest of the picture and understanding the whole view of the client.
Is it possible to combine those sources of data or the types of reporting that is going on so that everyone's looking at the same thing?
It's possible to do it. It's not an easy thing to do, but if you've got the right skills in place, you can then get the API that takes the information and brings it all together. So if you can get one data warehouse, the way my company is working on is we're building a data warehouse. So what we do is we're then taking the information using the client APIs of the e-commerce platforms. Within that, we can pick up some of the marketing data. If we've got the most important marketing data there, we can then pick up all the activity on the platform, and then we can look at the profit margins, for individual products or for the daily profit on the sales. So we can then start doing that, and then we feed that into a data dashboard. Within this data dashboard view, we can then, kind of align things and set filters there. So the larger companies that work in the retail environment have this access to this tech for years. But for the smaller SMEs, they've had barriers there, time, budget, trying to develop the projects. So I think solutions are out there, but a lot of the solutions on the market tend to look at one problem in the market, whether it's attribution, whether it's stock, and very few of the solutions out there that are these extra add-ons look at the whole picture. And I think that's the gap in the market.
Yeah, that's intriguing, and particular perhaps a different way to fulfil what a client's looking for from many perspectives internally. So you talk about accountants there. Do you attempt to have meetings with accountants within an organisation to understand how they report upon things, and so that you can perhaps serve what they're looking for as well?
I think within the retail space, using the kind of data reports I've talked about, you can understand how much, profit you're making on each day of sales. And then from an accounting point of view, you know what your fixed costs are. So if the accountant can tell you what the fixed costs are for the month, and then you know you need to cost that amount of money, you can then start getting those ratios in there. So you don't need to take away what the accountant does, but you can provide them with the information they need. And they're also very interested in how the stock's moved over time. And especially for the small retailers, for them to count their stock every day, every month, it's just painful to do that. So we can also help just by providing some of that information and joining it more closely together so the accountant can see what's happening. Because often accountants see the big picture, but they can't go into the detail. They don't know which products were the most profitable. They can't see the concentrations. Was it 10% of the customers that brought in half the value of the sales? Was it the fact that one particular product line is always the best seller, but then it's got a low margin? So if they could see that information, there's definitely potential to work far more closely together.
Brilliant. Okay, so that's the accountant, the finance side of the business. Are there any other departments within a business that you like to try and bring in and understand?
I think I really like to try and work with everyone. So I think if you can get a good board pack, so I think it's all about having the board pack. So when this business is looking, getting the whole picture and make that same set of information available to everybody, and really trying to get that information as quickly as it can be made. I don't want the business to spend their time trying to add up numbers and constantly do something manually, because when you do things manually, it's easy to make a mistake. It's easy to make errors in it. Whereas if you can get to one dashboard that everybody understands, you can then give different people in the business different access. So your marketing people might get access to the marketing campaigns part of it. You might want the financial director to see the financial information. So it's really about getting that information right at the right levels. If you've got one particular team involved in one particular product, for example, if you've got a retention-focused team, then obviously you want to give them access to everything that's around retention, so they can then see how these customers go on to buy in the future months.
Great. Okay. So if a head of SEO is listening to this and they're thinking, I'd like to incorporate more of this in the way we operate. I'd like to try and ensure that we reach out to more departments within the business and communicate in a way that other people understand and really start to understand the value of SEO. How do you incorporate more of this into the way that SEO is done, or perhaps even SEO training? Are there certain key aspects of what you're talking about that you try to incorporate in SEO training sessions so more SEOs that you work with are comfortable with the way that you do things?
I think it's quite a new concept for them, because I think often, they've never had access to this information. So although they're very good at what they're doing, they're not seeing the bigger picture. So I think it really starts with some kind of training sessions. It's really awareness. All this data's out there and it can be used by you. And then really it's about getting their data into the system and then starting customizing it so it makes sense to them, so they can see the world in the way they see it, that also makes sense to the retailer. So it's really trying to bring those two worlds together. And if you can do some training where you can actually say, here are some examples about case studies where people have worked and how they've changed their working practices. I think the excitement is once the data goes into the system, you suddenly think, yep, here's the big picture. And then I'm interested in break it down and look at this query or this way of doing it, this particular filter. And when you can then build that, you can then bring the world to light, because suddenly it makes sense to people. They get this light bulb moment, aha, I can see this and I can see how it's impacting that.
And you also talk about using a data warehouse. Is there any particular software that you recommend that you like to use?
There's a lot of different software out there, but I think the skill set isn't really about the software. It's about kind of knowing where you want to get to. So in your head, if you kind of have an idea of the data sits here, this is the point I want to get to, how can I bring that information together? So there's Power BI is one that's commonly used. There's all the Looker Google suite. We like to use one which is another party called Good Data. But I think the e-commerce data is hard to use, so it's not friendly, easy to use data. It's very complicated for every product that's set up. There's a product children beneath it. If you want to look at customer lifetime values, you literally need to look at the first time a customer purchases. Then every time an order's made since, you then need to be able to link it to that customer. You've also got to want to check for errors, that there's no problems with the data coming in, that it all makes sense. And then you also want to be able to add it and combine it. So I think there's definitely a tech element to that. I think that's a real barrier for SEOs to actually use the data, It's not simple data, it's complicated to use, and it also gets large very quickly, because if you're going to start with every single order ever made, and then from the time the company's set up, you've got to be able to work with a big data set. So I certainly have a data developer who's been really helpful in supporting me for that part of it.
And talking about working with a big data set, is this where AI comes in? Are you a fan of using AI to assist you with crunching data?
I think it's got its place in that. I think what I'm most interested in is really getting these kind of basic fundamentals out. Once the fundamentals are out, then companies can work out how to use it and then work out how they use AI. I don't think AI on its own is a solution. But I think if all the data's there and available to you, you can then say, AI, tell me this part. If I want to look at a new product that's performing well, you can then get AI to focus on that part of it. But I don't think it's got the complexity to build the thing in the first place. I think it's really about having that vision about what you want to do, how you're going to achieve it, and then putting AI to answer specific problems. And those specific problems might be relevant to the business. But if you're focusing on one part of the business, then you might miss the bigger picture. So if you can access everything straight away, then AI can help you delve into those really juicy parts where the opportunities are for your particular business at that moment.
Yeah, brilliant point. So understand your client goals to begin with, work out the systems that you need to achieve that, and then perhaps look to automate that in the future.
Absolutely, where you know specifically it's got a business need to do that and a benefit that's going to be there.
And talking about customers, you also like to share examples of campaigns that delight a client. What sort of campaigns are you finding that delight clients nowadays?
Well, I'm finding ones, and they're really, the things that are happening. For example, we work with a customer, and they're introducing a new helmet range, and they bought, 3 different helmets, same helmets in 3 different colours. They put the same marketing budget, they cost the same. And then we then looked at the sales, how they're developing over time. And what was really interesting was of these 3 helmets, one of them performed amazingly, it got really good sales, low refund rates. Another one was doing okay, and the third colour just wasn't as popular. So by being able to distinguish that the third colour wasn't as popular, the sales were lower, and then the refund rates were higher on it. We then looked at the stock in the warehouse, and then we could see at that point, the stock was starting to build up. So suddenly we'd actually realise that at 18 months, we then forecast it forward to 18 months, realised that this one particular helmet was going to be a real problem at this point. The money we'd wanted to get back in wouldn't be there because it was sitting in all this helmet that hadn't sold so well. So what we actually managed to do was to change the marketing budget, put a lot more blogs on this particular colour, reduce the marketing budget on the more popular colour, and then also put some sales and some pricing incentives in. So within that campaign for this particular retailer, we end up with a campaign that cost more money, brought in less sales, but actually we weren't then left with all the stock in this unpopular colour. So the outcome of the campaign was actually achieve the retailer's objectives, but not necessarily in a typical marketing way. And I think that's a real interaction, that when you manage to interact all these things together, you can actually do a campaign which makes the retailer happy, but doesn't necessarily have the marketing goal as the main focus.
I love that what you're advising is circling around what's important for the business as opposed to what's important to maybe just drive organic traffic. They aren't conventional SEO metrics that you're necessarily talking about, but they are metrics that shift the needle in terms of business success. So are these metrics that you're alluding to the future of SEO? What are the key SEO metrics that you like to recommend nowadays?
Yes, I think I haven't come from an SEO background. I'm not an SEO person. And I really only moved into e-commerce after the lockdown. So I'm coming from a data background. My background is I spent years and years in the big banks and other organisations. And I worked a lot with SMEs. So I kind of come from a different perspective. So I agree that from my point of view, from an SEO, I don't think the SEO metrics on their own are enough. I think they need to be able to go all the way in. So if we can take the organic traffic on a website, and then we can actually look at that to work out which customers, what the retention rate was of those customers, what products sold, what the refund rates were, what the daily profit and sales that brought in. And you can then compare your organic traffic against the paid traffic and look at the whole picture of the sales. I think for me, that's the market, actually saying, the SEO impact was that compared to the paid traffic impact. And for me, I like to look at everything all together. So I like to say, actually, for the SEOs, I think we can track that through, but we can't get to everything because we know we're not. So I think it's about actually showing that impact of the overall business. And then a company can then make an informed decision. Does it make sense for me to put more money into SEO? Does it make sense to put money into paid advertising?
So you've shared what SEO should be doing in 2024. Now let's talk about what SEO shouldn't be doing. So what's something that's seductive in terms of time, but ultimately counterproductive? What's something that SEO shouldn't be doing in 2024?
I always look at attribution. And in my data analyst head, I kind of know that there's ambiguity there. We know that attribution is very complex. We know that people go from one site to another. They look at different channels. We can never ever get to this full picture. And I think we have to kind of embrace this as well and be clear with our clients. So we always know there's some level of ambiguity. With the best will in the world, we'll never get to a complete picture. So sometimes actually be proportionate. If your client hasn't got a very complex structure and you can kind of work out what the gaps are and what you're not seeing, just work with those kind of assumptions and gaps. That actually, I know it's proportionate. I'm going to put proportionate effort into measuring my SEO and the ambiguity there, but I don't want to overspend on it because I might be better at putting my time and my budget into actually doing more marketing, more campaigns than really trying to track down and solve every gap. Because whatever gap we do, we know it's whack-a-mole, something new comes along and there's something else we can't measure and we can't track. I think, don't go down a rabbit hole. Just be aware that, attribution is going to always be a complex problem and things will happen. One day sales will be twice for another day and we won't really know why that is. So.
And talking about attribution, I don't hear too much about attribution models nowadays. Why is that?
I think the software's come in. So I think, I think some people are really, really into using the attribution software and they're going to use it. And other people have kind of not exactly lost interest, but I think the market's moved on now to AI. So I think AI is kind of hitting the attribution market, I think. And there's always something new and exciting in industry. And to me, at the moment, everyone's talking about AI, which is why the focus is turning off attribution.
Lucia Dello is founder of Dello Insights, and you can find her over at delloinsights.com. Lucia, thanks so much for adding your additional insight to SEO in 2024.
Thank you, David.
I've been your host, David Bain. You've been listening to an episode of SEO in 2024 Additional Insights, a Majestic series that complements the original SEO in 2024 podcast, video series and book. Find out more at SEOin2024.com.